with the first topic on marijuana. So I think there's some big moves that are happening both at the federal level and also the state level. Um, and so if you scroll down that list, Nate, we have a lot of states that are going to have the that are going to have their on their 22 ballot for the recreational use of marijuana, which is a pretty big deal. I think 26 states so far, which are mostly on the West Coast and some on the East Coast and then spattered. But I think what we're seeing is we're seeing a big push for like the South, the Midwest, which is I think a really big move for recreational use, because obviously those can sometimes be considered the more conservative states. But if we start to see more of these states adopt recreational marijuana, I think it's going to have a really important and substantial impact in the long term, um, for these marijuana stocks. And I'll bring up a couple in a second that I'm looking at. But just to go through this list, if we go down Arkansas, adult use, Idaho, recreational use, Maryland, Mississippi, Missouri, Nebraska, like think about where these states are in the US map. Like this is a pretty big deal. Ohio, which is that would be a really big deal just based on its political, how important that state is politically. Wyoming, there's a lot of stuff happening. So this is something I'm going to be looking at moving into 2022 as we see those on the ballots. As we get more data coming through about how many people in the preliminary kind of results that they typically take, how many people are for this, and then that could have a big indicator on which states and how many states could be added to the list for recreational usage. So that's one aspect I'm looking. The second one, perfect timing, is at the federal level. So this is pretty important. So at the Senate, they're trying to put a bill together. It's basically like the decriminalization of it more. And let me think of the name. It's a Schedule One.
Hmm.
So cannabis is right now a Schedule One drug, which basically if you have possession, then you're punished with jail and fines. And so this is something they're trying to put on the ballots or pass through the Senate. I think it's coming into 22 as well about decriminalizing it. And so that's really important because if you scroll down some, let me see if I where I can find that part. I think it's what are the new draft legislators doing? So they failed last year removing penalties for marijuana. But there's a part that in this article that talks about how is it even Schedule One still really? That I mean, some people might agree with you there, some people might disagree, but I think the main thing that they put here that they say which would be the biggest positive is that it's
Hmm.
going to it's going to make it easier for businesses to create and to create and set up business structures to sell pot basically. So I think that can lead to like an increase of overall adoption. Um, yeah, I think that's the part marijuana producers and retailers. Um, and so it said we'll solve banking, taxation, transportation problems, and cannabis reform advocates. So I think this could be a really big deal in terms of, again, if we get more federal regulation on it, that can really help adoption and growth of that sector and industry. And so these are a couple things I'm really looking at. Nate, I wonder if you have any thoughts on this, any feedback, or what do you think? Do you
Yeah,
think
it's an
these are
interesting
important steps?
topic. Absolutely. I mean, strictly from a monetary standpoint, the state of California came out with Prop 64. That's a state bill, and I think the federal government's kind of following suit. But I just pulled it up. California looks like $185 billion in capital gains, the most ever, resulting in 18.5 billion in tax revenue for the state. So if we're just looking at it from a fiscal standpoint, states need money. You could bet your arse that the federal government, Biden, how's he going to start paying for some of his stuff? I think that the Biden administration would be very smart to be looking at this not only from a political standpoint or progressive agenda, but also he's looking to invest how much money into infrastructure and all this, social services and everything else that he's trying to pull off. So many states are going to be they've been at the vanguards of this for years, and now the federal government, typically the laggard, is going to finally start looking at adopting something like this. I think it'll be a net gain at the end of the day. And to the point of legalizing it, I think that's a very important opportunity for folks, specifically those who have been biasedly, substance one is a strong abuse, if you will, in terms of the system. But I think if we're talking about reform and being able to give opportunities back to folks who were reprimanded unjustifiably so and disproportionately so, I think this is going to amend some of those wrongs, if you will. A little too late, maybe, but for me, I think it's a win-win if you're looking at it from both a monetary but also social standpoint. I don't see why not. But anybody else have any thoughts on this? I know there's a couple stocks that we're looking at. Maybe talk about them a little later. But
I'm back. I'm sorry, I'm having so many audio
I
issues,
got
but
you. You're good. Did you
but
want me to pull
yeah,
up the stocks? I
yeah.
mean,
If you want to pull up the first one, which is GRWG, um, so this stock is interesting. This is something that I've heard about quite a while ago. I've just kind of been watching some of the pot stocks and weed stocks, more from a distance because I felt like they got a little overhyped and a lot of that momentum was still kind of falling into these companies. But this one's interesting because they've dipped pretty substantially um, over, since February when we saw a big peak in a lot of names. But when I'm looking at valuation and growth, this is one of the companies that I think is really interesting right now because they just came out with earnings. And so they saw a 200% growth year over year in earnings, and their net income positive. So, if they say they keep up, they've raised their guidelines to about, they're saying they might hit a 500,000 or 500,000,000 in revenue this year and be net income positive. And right now they have a market cap of 1.8 billion. So when I'm looking at this company, I'm like, okay, their valuation's decent. It's not that bad. A stock that we've talked a lot about on here is Tillery, TLRY, and
mm-hmm.
Tillery has lower revenue and their market cap is 4 times as large. And so I'm trying to look for names that I could see have a potential that are maybe a little bit more undervalued. They still might be a little hyped up more than they should right now, but the valuation's not super crazy. And so this one's I'm kind of eyeing right now. And kind of when I break down the charts, on just some price points I'm looking for, the stock's at a pretty important support line right now, which is around the $30 price point, 31. And so I'm really looking for it to hold that $30 price point. If it kind of starts bottoming there, that's a pretty bullish sign for this stock. Um, it's still showing a lot of negative momentum, technically speaking, but if it can hold this kind of 28 to 30 range, it could start bottoming out here and it could be a price point to start consider buying at with a really tight stop loss. So that's one weed stock I'm specifically looking at moving forward. As kind of we just talked about, it seems like there's a lot of opportunity as more states more federal regulation in the positive sense, and more states adding it to the ballot for next year, um, trying to get it approved for recreational use. And the second stock that I've talked about quite a bit, um, both on my YouTube channel as well as in the Discord, is Maps. So I think I like Maps because it's a different take on um, it's a different. My bad, everybody. My video's off. It's a different take on playing this kind of industry. So, when I'm thinking about assuming that might um more states might have regulation pass, um using recreational or approving recreational use, more federal things. Weed Maps is a way to play the overall industry, because what Weed Maps is, if you never heard about them, they're basically a marketplace where companies can list um their what's that? What's the name for the shops? I'm forgetting the term. What's it called, Nate?
Dispensaries
Dispensary. There you go. But
and
dispensaries can
deliveries.
list,
Yeah.
and yeah, they can list their company on there. People can search through all the inventory in their local shop, their local dispensaries, and they can get it delivered or they can pick it up. And so this is a way to play the overall industry. Grow is to specifically GRW, whatever it is, Grow Generation. They're a way to play a specific company that's succeeding. Weed Maps is to play the entire industry, and that's why I like them. Um, when we look at their, I think you had it up on the side screen right there.
Mm-hmm.
When we look at their how they're doing in terms of annual earnings, so they are seeing a growth this year. It's not crazy year over year growth, but more positively is they're seeing their net income increase substantially. And so what we're seeing is they're making decisions that aren't really increasing costs, but they're able to increase their bottom line, which is a really important, I would say, step in any growth company, which I like quite a bit. They just came out with earnings. They beat earnings. They adjusted their EBITDA. For the year. They're still on track. So this is a company that I'm looking at as well, and a different way to play this kind of industry. And their price is currently at around 13 bucks. It's really important for the stock to hold around 12.80 if we talk technically for just a second. And so that's kind of what I'll be looking at. Um, and if they can't, then I might be adding in the like $10 to $11 range because I don't think they're terribly priced. A lot of people don't know about them. They're not as hyped out on the
Mm-hmm.
markets, but I think they have a lot of potential. They're kind of the number one kind of platform for people wanting to buy pot at their local dispensaries. So those are two plays that I'm looking at specifically in this industry.
I agree.
So
I
I think
agree.
you should keep an eye on them.
Yeah, I think they're sleeper stocks, specifically MAPS. I know in Sacramento, the capital of California, they're pushing heavily right now for a lot of reform, or they were in the past, maybe not as much right now, but I'd see their names on billboards all over the place. So once they start getting more comfortable with state legislation and then federal, I could see this thing pop in.
Yeah.
I mean, it'll take off because then they could do mass marketing, across all
Yep.
states, and by economies of scale, it just drops dramatically the price of doing business, if you will. So I think that's a huge one. And then the hydroponics sector, man, like
Yeah.
that's a
Yeah, they do
huge one
hydroponic. Yep.
on the other stock we were talking about. So I think
Yep.
there's a
Grow
lot of
generation.
opportunity. Yeah, exactly. I mean, I don't know if I would. Let's see. I'm just curious. Year to date, 3 years out. Yeah, I mean they were what, $3, $5, and then they just popped here like
Yeah.
uh, about last year.
Yeah.
That kind of makes sense. I mean, people are starting to do home grows, and from a commercial standpoint, it's more feasible that way. So, very interesting stocks. I don't know. Anybody else looking at these in particular,
Any
or
other names
looking?
out there?
Yeah, I'm very curious to see if anybody else has any thoughts on that. But definitely, I think those are two on my watch list as well. In fact, I have some maps that I bought. I think we did. You end up buying some a while back? Can't remember if we both went in on them at the same
I
time.
bought
But
it at 14 bucks a little while ago, and then I ended up selling it because I just saw some weakness and I was waiting to see if it
mm,
came back a little bit. So I
got it,
sold my position, but I'm waiting for a time to buy back in
got it.
because I do believe in it long term, just waiting for the right price.